shining. Those greens of winter, the holly, ivy and the hellebore, gleam, and the lighted window beaming across the waste is an eye looking out for us. Whatever shines sees the burnish on polished furniture, the glow of brass, the pristine glint of a window pane. All things caressed with care give back that tenderness, tell us they'd miss us if we weren't there. So when I drape the lights around the Christmas tree, dot it with tinsel, baubles and shiny fripperies, and set it gorgeous in the front room window, it's for you to see as you walk around the corner out of Mortimer Road, for you to know my heart is gazing, less ostentatiously, along the street, waiting for you, reflecting your brightness, your warmth, your cherishing.
Star, Poems for the Christmas Season, is a new collection of work by Angela Graham, and I'm very pleased to say that she joins us in the studio now. Angela, first of all, thanks very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. Yeah.
And I suppose just to begin then, in terms of background, can you tell us what it was that inspired you to write a collection of poetry around the theme of Christmas?
It was seeing something online, actually, a photograph that really caught my eye, and it, you know how a photograph just pulls you in, and it was of a carving, and there was no information about it, and I looked into it, and it was from a 12th century cathedral in Autun in France, and it is a very special carving, I think, and I could tell you the story of the carving, but way back, about 900 years ago, the man who was given the job of building a cathedral in Autun, which was like a rocket ship, you know, he had all these pillars that were holding the roof up, and he realised that around the top of each pillar were 4 faces of stone, and he decided, since he was a master mason, to carve the Christmas story into those stones. And I imagine that he must have been lying there one night thinking, I know about the 3 kings coming from the east, but where did their story begin? So you asked me, where did the collection begin? He thought, where did the 3 kings story begin? And he carved the moment where they're all asleep and an angel comes and pokes one of them, who opens one eye like that, and the angel points with the other finger to a star. And it's the moment before the moment when the story of Christmas and the Magi begins. And that fascinated me. It's the image on the front of the book in a lino cut by the modern artist Martin Erspammer. I just like the notion of a moment of inspiration. So that was my moment of inspiration for the book. And I got very interested in those 3 men, the 3 kings, the Magi. They're mysterious figures who come from outside the centre of the story. And then I got very interested in what else happened to them before they enter the pages of the story that we know. And I began to imagine their lives. So at the centre of Star, Poems for the Christmas Season, are 6 long poems, one for each of the 3 kings and one for each of the 3 queens, because I reckoned, well, they were probably married or they had a queen beside them on the throne. Who were those women? And we never think about the women in the story of the 3 kings, but now you can meet the 3 queens in this book. They each have a different take on what was going on while the kings were off on their great journey and what happened after they came back, because that also fascinates me. The 3 kings leave the story as we know it. What happened next?
That is very interesting. And I'd like to ask quickly as well about form, because this, of course, it's not your first piece of work that you've done. You write in prose as well. So why did you choose poetry for this collection?
I've always written poetry since I was a very small child. And my first poem was about an angel, you know, because children look at these pictures they're given and think, what's it like to be an angel? So, and I'm Angela, so it's not unusual for me to be interested in angels. So I've always written poetry, and I felt that poetry at Christmas is really appropriate. It's a time in the year when there's a lull in the rush of activity, and maybe people would sit and read a poem. And I thought, that's a lovely idea. I will make a book of Christmas poetry. I'll make it something that a person would want to pick up and hold. It's got to be as beautiful as I can make it. There are 15 lino cuts in it, and they are really lovely pieces of work. The poems aim to represent many facets of Christmas. The book begins with poems about the aspects of Christmas we're all familiar with: Christmas cards, thinking about, meeting the neighbours in the street, who are you going to see, very ordinary things, going Christmas shopping, being in shopping arcades. And then it moves into the story of the three kings, the three queens, and then it comes out into the bigger social issues of climate change, refugees, things that worry us about Christmas, terrible violence, personal trauma, and then it sort of goes through the Christmas period into the new year and ends on that sense of a beginning. Autumn Cathedral, Magi. Does the sky have tent poles? And some cathedrals are forested. God walks in their depths on a December afternoon, while the topmost branches brush the undersides of planets fixed mid-orbit, those stained glass windows fruiting overhead. Here no one thinks of weight, of downwardness, and how the roof desires it. God pauses among the pillars at a carved capital that always lifts his heart. An artist like himself, from this blunt-cornered oblong stone, gives us a bird's view of a bed draped in a ruched counterpane, three kings tucked in. But the eyes of one, popped open, register, why, who? Still unaware of the angel at his shoulder, stroking his hand, whose other index finger points at a star. God sighs at the weight borne by the moment after such a moment, at how he waits for a man to look up at the sky and recognize and seize his chance of joy.
And so to come to the Christmas story itself, and the Magi being, if you like, the central theme of it, we usually do think of them, the three wise men, we'll think of them as a unit, we do think of them as sort of as a collective, but you've given the sort of three of them, their own pieces. You have Balthazar, Caspar, Melchior, and they've got their own individual poems. Just yourself that approach, because I mean, it was something I was struck by thinking. I usually do think of them as a sort of the clump together, but just for yourself to sort of individualize them and give them their own perspectives and so on. Like, can you tell us a little bit about that part of it?
Yeah. Yes, they come as a unit, don't they? There's no part in the story in the Gospels where they act as individuals, but I'm very fond of art and painting, and so I've known for a long time that there's a European ancient tradition that there's a young king, a middle-aged king, and an old king, and these names don't come from the Bible. There's Balthazar is the young one, Melchior is the middle-aged one, and Caspar is the old one. And traditionally, Balthazar is a black man, and there are wonderful paintings of these three kings in which these characteristics are shown. And I saw a particular painting in an art gallery in Berlin, which is by an unknown artist from the Netherlands from the 1600s. Very beautiful. And he sets it in daylight, and Mary is there with the baby and the three kings close up. And outside the window, you can see a typical street of his period. And there are people going by, rubbernecking, as we'd say now, gawping. They see these strangers coming in and they're, oh. And the painting is all about gazing, who's looking at who in the picture. And I think I was very influenced by that, because in that painting, Balthazar, the Black King, is standing at the back with a wonderful jewelled gift in his hands, very serious. The other king, perhaps the eldest, is gazing absolutely rapt at the baby. And Melchior, I think, is kneeling with his gift. I think that started me off thinking about this semi-characterization that there's always been traditional, and thinking, all right, who is Balthazar? So in the book, Balthazar becomes, I suppose he's the youngest king. It's a story about him and his wife in the poem. So she has her poem, and it's almost a love story in miniature. And Balthazar's poem for himself is about the problem that I see with the three kings, because when I read the account in the Gospel, the three kings come to Jerusalem, and having followed the star, and what do? They go straight to the king, to King Herod. They never seem to stop with a bit of political nous and think, would a king want to hear about the infant king of the Jews who's just been born? I mean, they expect him to be happy. Well, he isn't, as we know. He plots to kill the child. They seem to me extraordinarily naive if they were kings. And that really got me thinking. I haven't actually myself read that sort of thought before, but it's always been very obvious to me. And another thing is that they go and they find the child and they give their gifts, and then they're warned in a dream not to go back to Herod. But there's no mention, and they leave home by a different route to escape him. And I thought, so they never went back and told Mary and Joseph, you better leave. No, they don't appear to have done that. So I imagine, what did they feel the day after they'd left? And that young family, what had happened to them? So in the Christmas story, it seems to me, there are these many aspects which are not told. So a writer's free then to imagine the events, imagine the personalities that put together and emerged in that result. You know, because part of the story of that family at Christmas is that they have to run away. You know, they have to get away from Herod. And so they go the flight into Egypt, as it's known. Now, I don't deal with that directly in the book, but there is a beautiful lino cut in the book. Again, a scene I have never seen depicted before, which is just as on the front of the book, it's the awakening of the Magi to that first moment of, oh, there's a star there. That, you know, the Holy Family, as we call them here, you know, is and the same angel pokes Joseph and says, you can imagine the angel saying, wake up, run away. And I'd never seen that moment depicted. It's Joseph's dream, but...
We've touched a little bit about art, you know, and sort of the inspiration it's given you in the work. I do want to touch on, I mean, and again, some of the way you use Christmas as a theme to address other issues, and because again, one of the pieces that jumped out at me in the collection was two paintings by members of the Gentileschi family. I mean, I suppose one of them is probably maybe more well known than the other, but the paintings themselves do exist there together in Pisa. Just for yourself, I mean, I suppose that the fact that you're able to use the Christmas story to talk about art and to talk about these two, you know, painters and their experiences, and sort of, because again, you're addressing issues and you're bringing the theme of Christmas into that there through Christ the Child, Christ as an adult as well. Yeah, yes. But just for yourself, I suppose, you know, telling those stories in this way as well.
I happened to see these two paintings together, and there's a painting of the Nativity by Lomi Gentileschi, who was the uncle of Artemisia Gentileschi. Now, she has become more famous in recent decades. She's been rediscovered because she was a supremely talented female painter at a time when very, very few women had the chance to learn to paint. And her paintings are, when we look at them today, we're aware of a rather tragic life that she had. She was raped as a teenager in her father's studio, And a trial was held, but she was tortured. She was tortured to make her tell the supposed truth. And that was typical of the attitude to women. Could a woman tell the truth in the court? And here we are with the French woman whose husband is on trial for. It's a story that is repeated. Artemisia Gentileschi survived that ordeal and went on to be extremely successful in Europe. Whenever she paints Christ as an adult, she's a woman who had the worst possible treatment at the hands of men, painting this man who's supposed to be God also. And seeing her painting of Christ and the woman at the well, in which Christ has one of the longest conversations he has with anybody that's recorded. He's with this woman who's alone at a well, who is thought to be an outcast because she's not with the other women. So why is she outcast and so on? And he takes great time and trouble to talk to her as a unique individual. And Artemisia's got this enormous canvas, the well in the centre, Christ on one side, and he's gesturing like this. And it's as though he wants to give his heart to her through the metaphor of water. And you look across the gallery, and there's her uncle's painting of Christ, the baby Christ, is on the ground, the naked little baby on the ground. He couldn't be more vulnerable. But this light is radiating up and across the canvas to the shepherds, who are the poorest people. And I thought, she must have seen that painting, grown up with it, this very dramatic Christ beaming out like a star that's fallen to earth. And, there was a whole lifetime of her relationship with Christ that, despite all those awful experiences and being made to marry another painter to make her respectable and losing children and then she still paints Christ as a man who has enormous respect for a woman. And I saw this link between, we sometimes forget when we see depictions of the adult Christ that he did have to start as an embryo and as a baby and grow up and all that. So it's about the humanity of Christ. That's what's behind those two poems.
And going as well from some of the bigger issues that are addressed or touched on in the work, there also seems to me that there's very personal poems that struck me anyways, maybe being from your own experiences. I'm thinking the likes of birth and news, just yourself as well. I mean, bringing what seems to me anyway to be very personal experiences into the work too, going from like the bigger picture to the smaller, more personal, more intimate as well. Just tell us. I mean, I may be wrong, but I can tell us just on some of those works as well.
One of the poems is prompted by the fact that when I was married, our first house, it was a old Victorian, typical city centre house, and it had been there for 100 years, and obviously lots of families had passed through it, and we would get mail from people going back decades, and so eventually you try and you do your best to pass them on somehow. But every Christmas we'd get a card addressed in the spidery handwriting typical of an older person, and there was never anything inside it or on the envelope, and it was addressed to the people 2 owners back, whom we actually happened to meet, and they never wrote back. When I finally said to them, these cards have been arriving, they had no interest in this person who was still writing year after year after year. And I thought, that's a lot of faithfulness to keep thinking your card would be welcomed. And I admire that sort of, perhaps deluded, perhaps dogged, but still full of self-respect. I am going to do the right thing this Christmas. I'm going to send that card, though they never write back. And that's what one of the poems is about. And I think there are many things that happen at Christmas like that. People who turn up when you don't expect them, or you get a card or you don't get a card from somebody, or they come to your party or they don't come to your party. And there's all these relationships going back a long, long way. And one of the poems is about, I have given birth to 3 children, and they were all very difficult, long labours. And I always had a period, maybe it only lasted for 24 hours afterwards, and I was always full of anaesthetic afterwards. And it was just me and the baby. I couldn't worry about anything. I had one job in the world, to look at that baby and to do what I should as a mother. And I've always been interested in the power of the human gaze. If you look at somebody well, you give that person an opportunity to blossom, if you like. If you look at somebody with hostility or indifference, they feel it, you know. So there's a line in the poem, you know, about the gaze. All I had to do was look that child further into life. It had become untethered. He or she had become untethered from me. And a mother's gaze is life-giving or life-denying. Yeah, so there are some personal experiences in there, yeah. Birth. After each of my deliveries, their hallucinatory pain, I entered into a day or two of sanctuary, in which my essential sacred task was to look the newly untethered into life. The gaze precedes and nourishes all other cherishing. I marvelled on the threshold of each child, in awe at witnessing the great world shifted irrevocably by one small person. After a good Christmas, there are some days like those. Feasted and reconciled, we are content in a time not ruled by time. We see that, yes, we love each other, down to our roots in the marvellous Glár. We will go on seeing each other whole and flawed and always wonderful.
I mean, a number of poems, you've sprinkled little bits of sort of Welsh, Irish, Scots and so on, you know, through them. Just again, coming from your own background, I mean, and your relationships too. Just tell us a little bit about that there, and just for yourself, I mean, making that decision, I suppose, here and there, we'll put a little bit of this and that in, just to mix it up a little bit, I suppose.
I've always been very interested in language. I never liked seeing words that I couldn't understand. I think I was a very stubborn child, and I'd do my best. I'd ask people, what does that mean? What does that mean? And I'd remember it, you know, and I married a Welshman, and as soon as I went to live in Wales, I began to learn Welsh, because I knew from being from Belfast that nuances here, even of accent, tell people things. They're busy decoding, oh, where's he from, where's she come from, and acting accordingly, you know. So I thought, if that's true for an accent, it must be very true for a whole language, and Welsh is very different to English. My husband's a Welsh speaker, and my children have grown up to be bilingual Welsh and English speakers. And Wales made it very, very easy for me to learn Welsh. Speak it with a Belfast accent, but it's still Welsh, you know. And my father's family are on both his parents were Ulster-Scots, and I grew up hearing that sort of speech, and I realised when I have begun to live here in recent years that I thought I'd get that, you know. So I put the time in. I really made it my business to recover my Ulster-Scots, and I've written quite a lot in Ulster-Scots, and I won the poetry prize in the Linen Hall Ulster-Scots writing competition, writing about the evacuations from Kabul, because I think you should be able to use Ulster-Scots. If you can't use Ulster-Scots to talk about anything, then there's something wrong. So there's a poem in the book in Ulster-Scots set in Ballymena, and it's to the best of my ability, and with help from a local woman called Ashley Todd. The two of us worked on it together. And I think the more people that write in Ulster-Scots, the better. It's a good thing. So there's a poem in Ulster-Scots about Christmas Eve in Ballymena. And there's Welsh because it comes naturally to me to write about Wales. And when I write about Wales, naturally I hear Welsh. And then there's Scots in there because I have got more interest. I was a macker for the Ulster-Scots Language Society earlier this year, which has pleased me a lot. And there's Irish because I was taught Irish in school. I'm not fluent, but I'm not afraid of languages. You know, I have a few other languages that I can work in even though I'm not a perfect speaker of them. And I think that's a good thing. So it's in all my books, you'll find languages other than English, because I think more and more people these days live in more than one language. It's not the sort of strange thing it used to be, and there are more languages in Northern Ireland and Wales now than there used to be, which is great.
To touch as well on the artwork, you've mentioned Martin Sparmer and the Lino cut pieces that are in it. Can you tell us a bit about that, where that came from? I suppose the idea and approaching them, and how it all worked out, I suppose.
Yeah, I was very keen to have for the image on the front cover a photograph of the wonderful carving from the cathedral in Autun of the Awakening of the Magi, which is mentioned in one of the poems and which I found inspirational. But that is extremely expensive. To buy the rights for that it was prohibitively expensive. So I began to look for other artists who'd done versions of it, and I found quite a few. And then I came across Martin Erspamer's, and I thought that is ideal for a book cover, because lino cuts use only black and white. They can be coloured, but basically they're black and white. And that can look great on a page with a poem because it doesn't fight against the words. And then I discovered that Martin Erspamer had done a lot of Christmas pieces of art, and he allowed me to have them, which is absolutely fantastic. And I think it's a bounty in the book. They're so tender and they're so vivid. They are just wonderful.
And so I know it is still early days with this collection having just been produced, but are you giving any consideration yet to maybe what's next for yourself in terms of your work?
I know exactly what's next. I have another full collection of poetry almost ready, and that's about politics and personal relationships. But in 2025, I'll be finishing a book which is the story of my family, and it's told through the story of the little 2-up, 2-down terrace house in East Belfast that I grew up in. And it goes right back to the 17th century and up to the present. And it's both prose and poetry. And I am really looking forward to finishing that, because I think that's going to be a very special book.
So where can people get the book?
Star, Poems for the Christmas Season, can be bought from any bookshop. You can order it from any bookshop. You can buy it online. You can buy it from the publisher, Culture and Democracy Press, which you can find on Facebook. And it's a beautiful feel to the book, and a lovely size and a lovely weight. Yeah. So it's goodies all the way through.
That's great. So Angela, once again, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today, and good luck with all of the work to come as well.
Thank you. Thank you.